It's all yours, brother.
Okay, let me set my timer here. Um,
Matt, if you go a little long too, that's okay. So don't feel pressured by the time.
yeah, okay, we're ready to rock and roll. My name is Matt. I'm a recovered alcoholic. Eric, thank you for asking me to speak and just feel it's also my first time here at this meeting. I didn't raise my hand at the beginning, but welcome to Mindy, Seth, and is it Debbie or Debita? Sorry, Debita. Um, Yeah, so we're in the same boat, all five of us, first time here. I've been very impressed by that Big Book Stumper. I mean, I felt like I was on a game show there for a second. It was a lot of fun, a lot of participation. Yeah, so I mean, I was asked, when I asked Eric, I was like, is there a topic or something to share about? He, kind of gave me some 3 points. He said, how have you established your relationship with God, your experience with the Big Book, and outline what God has done for you in your life. So I mean, I'll just generally share like what everything and kind of my 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 story to kind of get you where I've been. Um, my sobriety date is August 27th, 2010. I'm also a self-identified double winner. I also go to Al-Anon meetings too. My Al-Anon date is October 27th, 2017, which makes me just about 7 years in that program. And yeah, they've both been great. I didn't realize how much I needed Al-Anon until I got there, and how much codependency was really like littered through my life on so many different ways. So, um, but really, what set me on this path was my first time going to AA. I stuck after my first meeting. So, well, I'll tell you a little bit about what I drank, how I drank. I mean, the big book really describes about it. I mean, I was always like largely just, you know, I was a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I mean, when I started drinking, I was a completely different person. I mean, you can ask all my girlfriends at the time and my friends at that time. They were just like, like you're a completely different person when you start drinking. And thing is, I could never remember anything. I was always a blackout drinker. Um, once I started, I couldn't stop. And it was fun during high school, and like, it was like kind of fun during college, and then I started getting in more and more in trouble. Um, and I I say this to identify in my first step, but really like I totally fully identified when I came to AA for the first time of like when you start drinking, you cannot stop, right? So that allergy. And I also identified when you were stopped, you couldn't stay stopped, that mental obsession. And I was like, oh man. Um, so when I first came to AA, I came in off a pretty good bender. I had, um, yeah, it's been a while since I shared about this, but I had caught a case. It was double felony. Um, I stole a boat in Huntington Harbor when I was in a blackout and took it for a joyride. Police found me passed out on it halfway, just like in the middle of nowhere. They threw me in jail. I had no clue how I got there. And yeah, I was really shocked. I was just like, what the heck? And that wasn't even the killer. The thing that killed me was like when my dad showed me up and bailed me out of jail. He left me there for 48 hours. He was like, yeah, I'd left you there because, I wanted you to get a good taste. And it wasn't that. It was the disappointment that my dad had in his face. And it was also the feeling that like nobody else would want to take my calls during those times. And like I was completely alone. I had nothing going for myself. I had a job, but like I was like barely showing up to that. I was just littered with arrogance, um, prejudice, just all different things. Um, yeah, I was definitely pickled for sure. And I came to AA, and I actually crashed my car like the day before I went to AA on a blackout. And so I rode my skateboard there. in Southern California. I was in South Pasadena. I went to this meeting and they gave me a big book and I sat down and I just identified, man, like God just touched me that night for the first time and he's kept me in AA ever since. Um, it took me, it took me a couple years before I did the steps. I had a half-hearted attempt of in my first 3 years of doing an inventory. I really hadn't read the big book. I had read some of the 12 and 12, but I really relied on like sponsors and I went to a lot of meetings. For the first like year and a half, I went to almost 2 meetings every day. Because that's what I heard. I heard the meeting, keep going to meetings. Like if you go to meetings, like you're gonna be okay. And I was like, okay, well, as long as I go to meetings, but I was exhausted. I was like, I didn't want to go to meetings. I had resentments towards people in those meetings and the groups and how they were operating. And, I felt like people should have like, let me speak more and so on and so forth. And um yeah, it was year 3. I was barely going to meetings at that point. Um and I had this sponsee that a friend of mine told me about to pick up and or this guy need help and he ended up asking me to be a sponsor and he was like telling me about this meeting on the west side with this guy named Dan Sherman and it was pride that told me that like you cannot look bad in front of this guy, you need to go to this meeting. And so I brought in my moxie, it looked pretty good and I was like, sure, yeah, we'll go to this meeting, I'll pick you up, blah blah blah. And he's like, no, I'll drive. By the way, do not let somebody that's a meth addict drive after like 3 or 4 days of being like not using anymore, because you literally could probably die on that way to the meeting. And I felt that way, especially in LA. We got there, and this guy by the name of and we sat down, and we weren't in the back, we weren't in the middle, like we were up front. Like this guy Jason I was with wanted to be up front. He really was. He had the gift of desperation, and I remember sitting there and this guy, Roy, from New York, this guy, but he lived in LA, but he was talking about the bedevilments and he just started reading from page 52. And like he just was asking the questions like super slow. And I remember like I felt like he was talking right to me. And in my mind, I was just giving him the proverbial finger, like, you don't know anything about me. You don't know where I've been. You don't know anything about happiness or fear. And I remember walking out of that meeting and I was like, I need to come back. I need to come back. And I didn't hear from Jason anymore. He ended up ghosting me after a couple days. He ended up going back out. And frankly, I actually found out 3 years after that date that he had passed away. Just another angel brought me to where I needed to be. And I went back to that meeting the next day. I got myself a sponsor and we started going through the big book. And we used the BBA as a step guide to take us through. I was surrounded by amazing people: David Shigematsu, Dan Sherman at the time, he was still alive. Sheldon Wolf, who was still alive. Shelly Saint. Anyway, Shelly was there too. She's still in LA. She still goes to the Wednesday night meeting. And a couple other people, Chandra, Kyle McLaughlin. I'm not trying to break into people's anonymities. They don't attend those meetings, but they're still around. And man, I was just so like wrapped up in such a beautiful fellowship. And the beautiful thing was like I had nothing going on in my life, and so like I just immersed myself. And every single time that I felt like I was like, man, I feel like I'm being brainwashed. I feel like I'm in a cult. Like there was these little signs that would just keep me there. Whether it was listening to a speaker tape of Don Pritz or Mark Houston or Dan or getting these calls. So I started going through the work, and the first thing that really jumped out at me was saying the set aside prayer. And I was like, I told my sponsor, I'm like, you really want me to say this? Like, he's like, yeah, I do. I'm like, all right, it's a pretty simple prayer. And he's like, be careful. I'm like, what do you mean, be careful? He's like, you're saying this prayer. And this is the first time I actually started believing that like God answers my prayers, you know? I mean, if you really, really think about it, like I'm asking God to set aside everything I think I know for an open mind and a new experience or whatever portion I'm in going through this set process. And I was like, yeah, okay, like willy-nilly, but like I totally started like seeing things differently. Like I had like different perceptions of people, different perceptions of meetings. I was able to see truth in meetings. I was able to see like where I needed to be of service and how I was able to be of service. I stopped identifying and as an alcoholic for a short period of time because frankly, like I needed to set that aside. I was like, maybe I'm not an alcoholic, which is a scary proposition of being in AA for 3 years and like not thinking that you're an alcoholic. You're like, oh God, that's pretty fragile. Um, but we started going through the work, and he brought me to the circle and triangle the next time. And I never knew what actually like to do to stay sober. Everybody was like, just go to meetings, like, and nobody ever shared this. And like, I was like, my sponsor was like, yeah, unity, service, and recovery. And he asked me a bunch of questions in regards to it, like unity, like where are you in the fellowship? Are you integrated into that fellowship? Do people know you? Do you know people? Do people actually know intimate portions of your life? Do you go out for fellowship? So on and so forth. Do you have commitments at those meetings, right? Service. Do I actually, am I passing this message along, whatever capacity I have, whether 5 days more sober or five days more time and working the steps out of the big book with a newcomer, right? Or am I like entrenched in working with somebody else in this process? And recovery, where am I doing that? Where what am I doing right now in today for my step work, right? I still to this day ask myself those questions every single day. And if I'm not balanced in all areas of that triangle, I need to focus on that, right? And usually I'm doing pretty good. I'm in 10, 11, and 12. I practice that almost every day, right? Whether I'm working with somebody else, like I don't work with somebody else every single day, but I talk with a newcomer regularly. I'm working the steps. I do prayer and meditation to the best of my ability. I definitely have 10-step partners that I work with throughout the week. Um, unity. I have home groups. I have people that I check in with. Um, and in service I have people that I work with in both fellowships I'm a part of, and I pass this message on, and those things keep me sober. Those are the three things that you need to do. And then my sponsor said this at the this is the thing. He's like, look, man, this is the only thing you need to do. You don't need to do anything else. If you put this at the center of your life, you'll be happily and usefully whole. And I didn't even question at that point. I was like, okay, I think this guy might be right. I think this guy might be right. And I had a little bit of faith that like kind of chipped away. So we go into step one, and I see like litanies of things of like where my physical allergy is, where mental obsession. And there's just like countless things of evidence in Bill's story, and there's a solution. More about alcoholism. I totally identify with Jim's story, with Fred, all of those, like, and they're in the Jaywalker, like even those extreme examples, like I totally get it. Like I mean, I was that. Like every single time that I said at a firm resolve that I wasn't going to do it again, there I ran in front of a fire truck, you know, and or I put milk in my whiskey, right, or whiskey in my milk. Thought it was going to be okay. Just obscene ideas and thoughts about alcohol came in and around my mind. And I started to believe that my mind was broken when it comes to alcohol. And I didn't like the idea that I was broken. That was a really tough concept for me. And thank God I was saying the set aside prayer during that time, because if I wasn't, like I don't think that I would have been able to have any sort of wherewithal to be able to really think that I was damaged, you know? And but thank God I was. Thank God I am, because it brought me to another understanding. So I came to this the spiritual malady, the bedevilments, and we took. I remember we took like 2 hours, and we went through them like super slow. I still review these on a weekly basis. So page 52, that's what I was sharing about. I think when Eric was at that meeting, um, prey to misery and depression, full of fear, like unable to control your emotional natures. All of those like completely resonated with me for the first time. And those were the things that were fueling my mental obsession. And those were the thing, and then ultimately would fuel my physical allergy when I took that first drink. And I remember Dan saying that if I check in regularly on on my spiritual malady, that I have potentially the ability to correct it, whether, be more focused in the circle and triangle, more step work or whatever it might be, or an invitation, effectively more invitation of God in my life, more God, more God. Um, and then you know, we went into step two, and I took a look at some prejudice that was really there. I came to understand, what the new vision is for me, or if I set aside prejudice and if I seek God on a normal basis, that like on every single day, that I could ultimately find a relationship with something greater than myself. um, I love the concepts that they put. I never heard these. By the way, every single time I read We Agnostics, there's something new that comes out. There's something. It's like the most versatile and transformative. Like it's almost like Bill like wrote this and like put so many different like, you know, um, he used different rhetoric and diction and like different vocabulary in there that like is kind of a transformative like like the word can change, you know um, and I love it. And sometimes you just don't see stuff, and then you do, like the Columbus journey. You take it on faith. Um, there's just so many different things. Galileo's faith, like, and potentially that working for you, right? So like, if these people had faith for something while they were being persecuted during this time, like, could this work for you as well? And I loved it. And I was like, yeah, I think this can work for me. And I started to be chipped away. And I did this meditation with my sponsor. And, he asked me, where did you see God in your life? Where's God been in your life? And like, I had moments in that meditation where I've seen God, right? With me and my father, he walked me through the garden as like a child. And there was just peace and serenity and calmness. And that was something I could draw on, you know? And that really, really, propelled me into step three. Yes, I was playing the actor. I was the director. I was like the producer, and all I was doing was confusion, right? And all I was doing was causing chaos and harm. Um, and my only answer was God, and having Him focus me, having Him provide me with the diligence of just being the one, either the actor and or the um, uh, the agent to the principal, and or to the son to the father. And it was transformative. And I remember reading those promises of step three. You'll be essentially transformed and reborn. And I believed that was going to happen, and it did. When I took that step three, man, I got some pop, man. I got some pop in my step, and like I was a brand new person. And I remember going to these meetings, and like I was quiet when I first came into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was quiet again in year three and into year four until I started doing this, and I started actually having a voice and having some, having fun, again. And like I just remember it being so beautiful. Um, so I did a four step, and as I do a pretty comprehensive four step. It's very thorough. It's an extended third column, looking at the 7 areas of self. And then I asked myself, where was I at harm? What was the fear? Were there harms involved? And I take those to the column. I also do a fear inventory, and I do a sex inventory, which in my throughout my process and my years, I've I've kind of added to the sex inventory. I also include like just people that I've had relationships with, whether it's a boss, whether it's a friend, and I run it through that same process. Um, because those areas of like, did I arouse jealousy? Did I arouse suspicion? Like those can be transferred. My experience is they can be transferred into other areas and other relationships in my life. Um, and after I do that, I ultimately write a sex ideal. I write a professional ideal. In that first process, I only did a sex ideal, but I've done professional ideals. I've done parenting ideals. which have really, really helped me and transformed me into becoming a calmer, more steadfast parent, a sturdy leader, somebody that's not raising their voice to children, um, things like that. I'll tell you one thing I think Tyler likes when I talk about this is that when I wrote my sex ideal, I I wasn't in a relationship. I hadn't been in a relationship for a while, and like I frankly just didn't trust myself in a relationship, and nobody ever really. I wasn't really attractive, Like if you kind of get that, it just wasn't an attractive person. And I think after step three, it became more attractive because I had a spiritual way of life, and like I had, I found God within me, and I wrote this beautiful sex ideal, one that allowed me to be of service to my partner, allowed me to be truthful and honest, and um, fair. And it wasn't about the person that I was looking for. It was about me and how I wanted to show up in those relationships. And within 2 days after that, I met this beautiful woman at this networking event, and I just had this confidence, and I went up to her and I started talking with her, and um, I didn't get her number at that place at that time. I guess I was a little scared, but it all came around, and I ended up um, getting a hold of her email, and I sent her an email, and she said, "This is verbatim what it says. Yeah, give me a ring and we'll talk about it. We can chat." And in long story short, is I ended up marrying that woman 4 years later, and it was she's still a part of my life, and I love my wife Becky, and we have 3 kids today, and when we moved to Chicago out from LA. I mean, it's just this thing. I mean, it just totally does amazing things for us. Um, so fast forwarding to 6 and 7, I my sponsor had left. My sponsor left for Thailand after we did the fifth step, and which I really had a really good experience with the fifth step. I had to come back to my sponsor at the end because I held something back. So if you ever have something, you've held something back, like give yourself a second chance. Like it's okay. People do it. I ended up coming back to him and saying, hey, I left this off after my review. And I remember feeling the peace that it talks about. And we went to the meeting right after I told him. And I just remembered that hour. I was absolutely on cloud nine. It was just like so peaceful. It was such a beautiful way. I mean, I never had a I still to this day have not had a meditation like that ever. It was just amazing. Um, we got to 6 and 7, and my sponsor went to Thailand. And I was like, okay, like, how long are you gonna be gone? He's like, oh, I'm gone for like 2.5 weeks. I'll talk when you get back. I'm like, what? What are you talking about, man? I know all these, I like have a litany of things that I need to work on, like, and you're leaving? He came back and I was like in shambles. I was just like, I met him at the airport. I was just like, dude, you gotta help me. I think I gotta start this over again. Like, this is not a good experience. I've had like, so bad. And he's like, so are you like, you ready to give those to God? And you've been trying to work on those yourself, right? And I'm like, yeah, I'm totally ready. I'm like, yeah, I've been working on it for 2.5 weeks. He's like, well, maybe just let God work on them and you not work on them. And then I finally understood that 7 step prayer of like, I give myself to you, good and bad. And I was like, oh man. So he's using my vices and my character defects to be effective with people. And like, maybe I do need to surrender this a little bit more. Maybe I do need to take this in and like, you know, have God do the work that I couldn't do in step one, similar to my alcoholism. By the way, you ever go to Al-Anon, like your character defects, like those are the things that like you have to surrender on a daily basis. And so I'm so grateful that, going through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, like showed me and like gave me the experience of like having willingness to surrender and what that process looks like of like bringing those up. I got to this group in Chicago when I moved here in LaGrange, and like they had this daily. These guys are pretty like, they this is Paul Martin's old group, and these guys are pretty rigorous. And like what they did with the 7 step is like they would review they would review their character defects on a daily basis, and they'd show how they were used and not used, and they would ask God to remove them if he sees fit. And I started imploring that, and like, man, it was pretty amazing. Like I saw so many different things highlighted throughout my day of like, yeah, God is definitely using, you know, my inability to act quickly, my he's using my arrogance in this moment right now, or I've or I've or even better, like I would see this regular, I still see this regularly, like people interrupting me before I say something that would show that I need to like show myself in a better light, and or like prove myself to somebody. And I would give that moment of I'll get that moment of pause and be like, oh yeah, you're right. So um so anyways, I come to steps 8 and 9, and I made this list and had all these people written down and pluses and minuses, flashcards. Am I willing to make it? Can I find these people? Do I have their addresses? All the whole thing. And there's only one person I was unwilling to make an amends to. I reviewed the 8th step, and I came willing to make that amends. And as soon as I was done with that, I had 2 people that I hadn't talked to in like 5 years reach out to me that were on that list. And I was like, the big book, I'm paraphrasing here, but the big book says, we don't balk at this, right? I think it says something to the effect of this is like, you know, we committed ourselves for victory over alcoholism, you know, and how willing are we to go to any lengths to do that? And, thank God I had willingness at that point. And like, I feel like I had a lot of momentum. And so I just immediately started making amends, and I went through about 3/4 of them within about a 3-week period. Um, and they're amazing. Um, I'll share one of them with you. So I had gone to a university, and I played a sport there, and I had I was doing a lot of my drinking and using during that time. And one day I got in a position where like I passed out in the middle of the university, which is totally frowned upon. And uh, oh, sorry, I had an incident, and the police had arrested me, took me to the drunk tank, anyway, so on and so forth. But the police shared that information with the university, and I was put on a judicial review board. Um, I ended up lying to that judicial review board. I put fraudulent information in front of them as well, that I wasn't there, that I was in a plane someplace, I was going someplace else, and I forged documents, and so I had to make a restitution for that. And so I ended up going up to, and I also had an amends to make to my coach as well, because I put him in harm's way because of that. The judicial review board ended up telling him while I was playing the sport, and I didn't tell him, because I didn't want him to find out, and it put our team in a lot of jeopardy. Like it almost took away our NCAA privilege. If it was found out, it would have taken away our NCAA privilege. So I made an amends to him. I was like, and I was very sudden, like, this is where I was. These are my wrongs. These are my harms, and it was wrong for me to do this. And how can I make this right? And I'm like simplifying it. Um, and I remember him looking at me. He's like, "Do you know Mike Lawson?" And I'm like, "The head of Judicial Review Board?" I'm like, "Yes, I vaguely remember." He's like, "I want you to go over there and talk with him. That's how you make this right." And I'm like, "Okay, whatever you say, God. Here we go. Sure enough." And I was like, "I don't know if I can get over there." He's like, "Yeah, I'll give you a ride." So he puts me in his van, and he drives me over there, drops me off. He says, "Matt, I'll talk to you in a couple days, and God bless." And I ended up walking in there, and Mike was in his office. It was a Saturday afternoon. He was the only one in the judicial center. And I knocked on the guy's door, and he was like, he remembered who I was. He goes, "Matt, what are you doing here?" I was like, this has been 6 years since I graduated from this university. He knew who I was. And I remember sitting down with him, and I was so scared, but I was just like, I put my head down, and I had my card, and I was just like, Mike, I did this, I fraud, I forged all these documents, I lied to you, I lied to the judicial review, like blah, 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 like this, like I was totally wrong and, how can I make this right? All in the back, I knew that this person move my degree. I remember that this guy he has the influence and the power to essentially like make or break anything that I'd done at that school. And I walked away with a good education and a good degree. Um, but I was willing to set that aside. I had no choice. I wanted to be free, you know? Um, he looked at me and he's like, you know, I feel like I've been like lied to and, there's forged documents to me like every year, at least 2 or 3 times, but I've never had anybody come back and, you know, tell me that they were wrong and that they apologize and they want to make it right. He's like, I'm not going to give you out scot-free, but this is what I want you to do. He's like, I want you to write this essay, this 1,500 word essay. I was like, okay. And I want you to submit it to me. And I want you to remain active with me and our drug counseling program. And so I have. I still to this day am. And so I put together this essay. I had my girlfriend at the time, my wife now, review it. And I submitted it and he put it he made it anonymous, but he posted it in like the main editorial that they put out the newspaper they put out every month. And because of that essay, it sparked a conversation, and it sparked a wave of other people that were sick and suffering, other students that were sick and suffering from the disease of alcoholism at our school, and identified my depression that I was there. I identified like all these different things that had come up with me during that time about hiding and lying and being deceitful and like not having a place to go. And there is now 3 houses that are at the university that are all sober like houses. And because of that, I think I might have been a contributing factor to that. I'm not saying I started anything, but I'm just saying I was a contributing factor to that. And I helped people find a sober way of living and going to that and getting a good education. So I also want to share about one thing. It's like I recently did some work um, on um, on my kids about a year ago, and I was losing my cool a lot. I was really upset about different things, and I was yelling and screaming, and like it was not good. And I told him myself, and during a 10 step, and my sponsor direction was like, write some inventory on your child. It was 1.5, 2 at the time, and so I did, and I found that I did some harms, um, mainly by raising my voice and causing fear and things like that. And I looked at him, I was like, you want me to you want me to make an amends to a 2-year-old? Like he's not gonna remember any of this. And he's like, yeah, I do. And so I did. And I went there and I sat down with my 2-year-old. I've never seen him as, sit as contently and um, quiet and non-fidgety as I've ever seen him. And he just sat there. And I remember I cried so much during that amends. But I was like, Daddy's wrong. I shouldn't have raised my voice to you. I shouldn't have grabbed you. I shouldn't have done these things to you. And I want to know how to make it. I would like to know how to make it right. And you don't have to answer me today. You can tell me in a later time. And I remember, oh man, I remember him getting up and like walking over to me and just giving me the biggest hug. And just give me the biggest hug and he's like, it's okay, Daddy. It's okay. I love you very much. And he gave me the biggest kiss and he's like, can we go play with toys now? Can you just play with me and have some special time? And I remember during that time, like he said a couple of things of like, let's do this regularly. Like don't push me as hard as you want me to be. like just things like that. It was so beautiful. Mm. And man, don't ever let anybody rob men's from you. They're so powerful and they transform you so much. If you think that like character defects, like you're having trouble with character defects, look at your amends. Is there any out there that you can still do? You know? Because I think that's really where God really removes those character defects and like really helps you grow as a person. And that relationships get so strong with your creator during those times. And yeah, I've had a lot of amends and some of them have been great. So, some of them have been a little lackluster, but even the smallest ones, like the ones that I just told you about, like with my kids, are just like those ones hit home so much. One time, sometimes I'm a piece of something bigger. Sometimes I'm the biggest piece. And so I currently live in step 10 and 11 and 12, and that process has changed a little bit. It wasn't until I started working with this guy named Gary Brown that he really showed me the diligence of step 10. And like the hardest thing I think for anybody, especially as an alcoholic, is like telling on yourself, just being truthful, you know. And yeah, I messed up here, like, or just talking it through. I remember I was writing something down the other night. I don't even remember what it was. It was like, but like I need somebody to show me the mirror. I'm unable to see it. I still to this day am unable to see it. And that's like my disease today. All right. I'm unable to see truth or unwilling to see truth. Um, whether it's in being an alcoholic or, identifying as an alcoholic or identifying with chaos and control or being an Al-Anon or, you know, having anger issues. I need somebody to show me the mirror. And I think that's what step 10 does. It's like I invite God in and then I tell somebody immediately. And sometimes that's my sponsor. Sometimes that's, somebody that's just sitting right across the way from me. Sometimes it's my wife. And I make an amends. And I say, I'm sorry. I won't do it again. It was wrong for me to do that. I found that like writing down things that are tricky has been really helpful for me. Things that like I'm really can't decipher in my head. Writing those down are really helpful. And step 11, I've definitely, it's been, I totally believe that there's like that vision, right? That's described in step 2 and we agnostics that like, I have to learn to set aside prejudice on everything, not just spiritual matters, but like everything. And, but most importantly, spiritual matters, but like, it's, I have to set aside prejudice and like, I have to see God in everything. I have to see where God is. I have no choice. I don't have a choice today. Where is God? And my step 11 practice like starts, in the morning. Today it starts in the morning and I get on my knees as soon as I get out and I say, um, God, please show me the patience, tolerance, kindness, and love that you would cheer um, towards my family, towards my kids, towards my employer, and whoever comes to my mind during that time, right? And I usually pray for my sponsees, and then I run through page 86 to 88. Um, at the beginning, I was just reading those because, frankly, I didn't really have anything in the back of my mind or prayers or anything like that. Um, and I was found it really, really helpful to do that. Today, I understand those and I actually live those and like I actually see those. I pray them. I've memorized those prayers, especially the pause prayer. God, please enable me to pause during when I'm agitated and doubtful. Show me what you'd have me be in those moments. God, please grant me what I need um, to be of service in moments where I don't have the answers. Help me see where religious people are right. Somebody said to me once that religious people aren't just like, you know, priests and rabbis and stuff like that. It's actually somebody that has a discipline and a practice in a spiritual manner. That could be people in this room. Help me see where religious people are right. And I typically do a nightly review I used to write it down all the time. I don't write it down these days. I usually read what's on my page, and I just let it wash over me, and whatever comes up, I ask God to remove it and help me see where I can make restitution. And then I immediately do it the next day. If it's my wife, I would do it that night, but typically I do it the next day, whether it's my employer or somebody. Um, yeah, and then step 12, like, I've had a spiritual awakening. I've had this spiritual experience. I've come from this person that was, would bristle with antagonist towards God and any concept of God. And um, today it's like my foundation. It's my rock. It's like this is what drives me. This is what gives me the ability to do and the strength with physical, mental, spiritual strength to do all these things, right? Like my life is full. I was talking with my sister-in-law the other day. She's like, like these executive functioning. I was like, well, Amy, what is executive functioning? She's like, oh, like the discipline to like actually do your budget and like, pay bills and all that stuff and, be an adult. I'm like, well, God has definitely given me the executive functioning today. Um, you know, He has disciplined me. He has given me the spiritual way of life and I choose that road today. It's crazy. I choose that road. I have momentum in that direction. Um, and when somebody comes and asks me for help, I'm of service. I'm currently working with somebody that's local here in Chicago, and we're in step one. I've worked with a couple different people throughout my time. I, when I first like really got done with BBA, like the big book, like I just wanted to take this to everybody, and it was great. Like I actually wasn't able to really sponsor anybody before I got through the steps as outlined in the big book, and then I became attractive, and I actually had something to give. Right? You can't give anything away you don't have, and it's kind of insane to think that you could do that if you don't have a spiritual awakening, and yeah, I mean, I remember, my sponsees have kind of ebbed and flowed, and like I remember having like 6 or 7 at a time, which is a lot. I remember doing a couple workshops. I remember, you know, starting meetings, but I don't think there's anything better than like just sitting across the table from somebody eye to eye and like working them and just taking them through the big book and like having full on conversations and like letting God like speak between you and that person's spirit, and like watching that transformation happen. I also have to take and understand that I don't have that responsibility that I'm keeping that person sober, right? That this disease is cunning, baffling, and powerful, and it wouldn't I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy, frankly, you know. And I'm just really glad that somebody took the time and like I heard something, and God has always been, touched me in different ways, and that I got some smart feet, that somebody just said, keep coming back, and these little silly slogans we get all the time, like they do fit in somewhere, you know. I'll close with this. I remember I got really into Paul Martin when I was part of a member of the Grange group. I read a lot of his articles. There's a book out there that, he put together. He was the first person to really talk about, um, how you can redo these steps. And he said it in a very loud way, in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and in the grapevine, which I don't think you could do today. I really don't. I think it's too censored, my personal opinion. Set that aside if you wish, but I think it's too censored. And Paul did that. And one of his sayings was, when I'm helping somebody, I'm just another beggar trying to help another beggar find bread. And I totally believe that today. Like there's no holier than thou. There's no bigger or better. I'm literally one day more than that person. And I have a little bit more of a message today than them. And then why can't I help you? So I think that's it. So then thanks for letting me share.